First question is, does disinformation matter, especially for brands or companies or the business sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's easy to perhaps think that it's only really misleading information can hurt brand equity. There is no technology that is able to say this is mis or disinformation and here's how many times this has exactly appeared online.
Yeah.
So it's hard to be able to get a true sense of where your company might be mentioned or caught up in the discussion. So
do companies need to be more aware of what's being talked on social media?
Everyone's got a smartphone these days.
Yes.
Everyone's on digital devices. All of your community, whether they be directly impacting your company or potentially in your customer base or just in your industry sector, they will be seeing information about your business on SNS channels. So I would say to those companies that feel like it's not important, that really the reality is pretty clear now that if you want to be serious about being a publicly facing organization, you need to be tracking for this type of content.
はい、ピボットの竹下です。今日のピボットグローバルはディスインフォメーション、偽情報と企業ブランドです。お呼びするのは、メルトウォーターという SNS を分析するグローバルカンパニーのティム・オルークさんという、メルトウォーター日本代表の方です。ティムとはですね、東大で開かれた NATO のシンポジウムであったんですけど、本当に面白い人だなと思いました。偽情報というのは結構キーワードになってますが、実は企業やビジネスに本当に影響するということを学んだので、今日はティムをお呼びしてですね、早速このテーマについて聞いてみたいと思います。So Tim Ulrich, welcome to PIVOT.
Thank you so much for having me, Ryan.
Yeah, so today's topic is about disinformation and how it affects global brands. Before kicking off, I want to ask you, so you're the country manager of Japan Meltwater.
That's right.
Could you tell the audience what Meltwater does?
Yeah, for sure. So we're actually a Norwegian-founded business back in 2001. We're a very inspirational founder who really was at the forefront of internet technology and creating software at the start of the internet revolution, and built a platform that was really based off the concept of when you're having your morning cup of coffee, you can search for anything that's publicly available on the web, and it's going to bring back in a nice morning report all of that content. And this is pre-Google Alerts type of days. And we developed the software from there. So Meltwater, as it currently stands across our global business, we have about 27,000 customers, and we have operations in over 50 different countries. So we track for mainly online news content and social media content. So we work with a lot of different brands in Japan, many of the biggest beauty and fashion brands, those that are in the B2B space, in finance and so on. And also, of course, in public sector, where we work with ministries and small agencies, anyone that's related to tracking public discourse. So really our system tracks for all types of information when it comes to the PR and SNS type of industry.
So basically, do you guys track social media? And so the brands are interested in working with you because they want to see what the world is saying about you.
That's right. Yeah. So any company that has an interest in tracking their media coverage, whether that be in news or in social media, can use our software to type in keywords and bring back really quality results. So that could be from reputable news publications, not just in Japan, but overseas as well, but also publicly available content that's on SNS channels.
Got it.
Yeah.
Before joining Meltwater, you are from Australia.
I am from Australia.
And you're a journalist.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So I actually started my career in journalism. I was doing a cadetship at a newspaper in Melbourne called the Herald Sun. I don't know if you've heard of it, Ryan.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And very much was passionate about the news industry. That was my kind of connection to stumbling across Meltwater because we were an established business. That was back in 2012. I've been with the company for 11 years, and Meltwater was an exciting company because it was really working with organizations and businesses to help them with their PR strategies and understand the news environment and the changing news environment with digital media. And that's really where my passion remains today.
Great. So today we're going to talk about disinformation. So unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, in Japan, it's not still on the hot discussion right now. I just came back from Taiwan to watch the presidential election. I went to the United States. People are all talking about disinformation.
Yes.
So my first question is, does disinformation matter, especially for brands or companies or the business sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's easy to perhaps think that it's only a government-related issue.
Yeah, like international relation issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, because we have so many elections in 2024, everyone's talking about deep fakes and AI impacting election results and so on. But really, misleading information can hurt brand equity.
Right.
So companies can very quickly get caught up in mis and disinformation campaigns, or they can just be the subject of online discourse that is false, whether intentionally or not intentionally, that can go viral. And I think that what we're finding now is that companies need to be tracking what type of information is out there on SNS channels in particular.
Right.
And in Japan, I think it's something that we've seen even recently from the earthquake issues, how that's impacted different parts of central and western Japan.
Definitely.
How it impacts when it comes to things like the pharmaceutical industry. If people are putting out content that is talking about curing breast cancer or talking about different theories when it comes to the medical industry. Those things can
conspiracy theory
theory type of things. They can very quickly, spiral into attaching your brand to that discussion.
What do you mean by attaching the brand?
Well, sometimes they can actually just be mentioned in the conversations and then have to be responded to by those companies. So, or it could be, through the advertising ecosystem. So when we talk about how mis and disinformation spreads online, what can happen is that it can very quickly go viral. And because advertising online, it really is an eyeballs game.
Yes.
So the more clicks that someone gets, the more high likelihood that a company's advertising is
will
going
be attached to it. Yes, because this content will be very popular.
Okay. Exactly. Yeah, and then very quickly you can find yourself attached to an article that might not be actually true. So I think that those types of tracking mechanisms are really important for companies and government organizations, just to make sure that you're not inadvertently getting caught up in something that you don't want to be attached to your brand.
And even the companies won't realize that their brands will be attached to a false information news site.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and even though I work for a technology company, we're very much in the game of tracking for all of these narratives that are happening online. There is no technology that is able to say this is mis or disinformation, and here's how many times this has exactly appeared online.
Yeah.
So it's hard to be able to get a true sense of where your company might be mentioned or caught up in the discussion. So it's just something that everyone needs to be aware of, and you need to be, putting some mechanisms and structures in place of how to track it as best you can.
I see. So you mentioned a good point that it's very difficult at this moment, even AI cannot tell if it's false or not.
Yes.
So how do you guys help the companies that are worried about being attached to their brands to disinformation?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, we track for SNS content that's publicly available. We also track for, domestic and international news. So we have the largest database of sources, and what we can do is use AI technology to really analyze what trending themes, what narratives are spreading, and how they're actually interconnected between news and social media. So if something is spread on social media, how is it being reported in the news, and vice versa. And I think that relationship between PR and social is certainly converging. No longer can you think about those two areas as completely separate parts of a corporate business. So really what we're trying to do is for executives and for people that need to be making decisions about how to respond to these types of things, giving them an overview of all of the different types of narratives that are being spread.
So there was a Pew Research Center statistics, and it said that the most top global threat is disinformation.
Yep.
And you guys are a global company, and you work now in Japan, and you talk to a lot of Japanese companies. Do you think that Japan should be more aware of disinformation?
Yeah, I think it's growing in Japan. I think, when looking at recent events over the past probably 2 years, when it comes to disinformation affecting everyday society, it is growing. But you're right that perhaps Japan has been a little bit slower to be able to set up, mechanisms in the corporate sector of how to combat mis and disinformation. But I think, working for a company like Meltwater, we have a lot of companies that are customers of ours in Japan, and it's certainly been a hot topic over the past 18 months in particular.
Wow.
And I think it's only going to increase because public messaging from the governments is that, you know, not just the governments themselves or the politicians, but, you know, all facets of society needs to be aware of mis and disinformation. And I think that throughout 2024, that will only get stronger.
Why was Japan so slow to start at the beginning?
Yeah, I think you know, it's probably you need certain types of events to really kickstart public you know, sentiment and reactions to these types of things. And I think the COVID pandemic was, of course, a huge one.
Yes.
I think Japan had a very unique way of countering the COVID pandemic, and it was very successful on a lot of measures, and perhaps didn't feel the full effects of the misinformation campaigns that were happening from the pandemic. But then also, you know, if you look at the earthquake that just happened in January, I think that's been a real, I guess, trigger or alarm for all of Japan to see so many misleading narratives coming out about the true events of the earthquake.
Let's dive into the earthquake. What did you learn from this earthquake, from the Noto earthquake in Ishikawa Prefecture?
Yes, that's right. So I think what we found is that there were a lot of conversations happening online about the earthquake for good reason. So it was a huge global story.
Yes.
The images were really harrowing and concerning.
And people were seeking for information.
Seeking information online. So of course it was naturally attracting so many eyeballs. But very quickly what we found is that keywords like man-made earthquake.
Oh, 人工地震. Yes.
Yeah, and that has actually had over 500,000
500,000, wow.
in a 2-week period between January 1st and the 15th. And that's just on X.
Wow.
So in this conversation, that's certainly not all people saying that it is a man-made earthquake, because this has started from a concept or a narrative that's happened and perhaps a bit conspiratorial. And then people are also reacting negatively to that. They're posting about it and saying, no, that's not true. And then it feeds the ecosystem where so much of the content is coming through and being spoken about in news media that the earthquake is attracting the wrong type of messages.
That's interesting. Let me pause for a moment. So you said that even correcting the information will consequently lead to the spread of this information.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. So you can see this example article that we've got on the screen there of NHK when they're talking about the quake being reported on social media as a man-made earthquake.
Yes.
So you can see how they are refuting that, and they're saying that it's not true.
Right.
But clearly there's been so much online discourse about that particular narrative that they are picking up the story.
Wow.
And so that kind of creates a little bit of an ecosystem where conspiracy theories can be seen to actually spread really fast and get reputable sources picking them up. And perhaps that's something to always be mindful of if you're a business or any type of organization.
That's a very big dilemma because, you know, NHK is just doing their job. They're trying to correct the information, maybe debunking this information, but you know, it's an irony that they're contributing the spread of this information.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, you know, of course, NHK, most reputable source or one of the most reputable sources in Japan, and rightly so, is reporting a news topic that is extremely important. But, you know, you can see just the volume of people discussing these types of topics is so high that, you know, you have to realize that even if it is a false piece of information, it can, you know, attract a lot of eyeballs to it. And it is just a fact of our society at the moment. And it's something that brands need to be aware of.
Right.
That if you get caught up in these discussions, it really can snowball.
How can a brand be caught up in these discussions?
Yeah, so I think, you know, this particular example with the earthquake is probably not the best one for a brand per se. But if I think about, you know, things like healthcare products or anything to do with people searching for the best way to treat their skin or the best way to be as healthy as possible. You know, there's going to be a lot of theories online as to what is the best ways to actually treat those areas. And I think that if you have your brand attached to something that is just patently false, that claims to cure a certain type of disease or claims to, you know, have amazing effects in some aspect of your life, then very quickly, if that goes viral or if that gets a lot of eyeballs, then you can be, caught up in the mess of that discussion.
Oh.
So it's just, that's just an industry example, but it is something that all companies just need to be aware of and just have some basic kind of defense mechanisms around.
So you mean that, let's say a company is making like vitamins and there's a fake information that this vitamin will cure everything.
Yes.
And it gets attached to your brand, even though it's not true.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah,
What's the person lying, or why is he or she trying to use this as a...
I mean, that's hard for me to answer.
Okay.
But I think, not a lot of the time, I think there's a key difference. There's disinformation, which is intentionally putting out false information, and then there's misinformation, which is inadvertently spreading those messages because perhaps you believe it to be true. So, the different motivations are pretty clear there, but I think that it's just something that is part of our society now. It's a reality, and there is a ton of great things you can do for your business and for your organization in promoting on SNS channels and being able to put out public messaging online. But this is just one area that you need to be across that could potentially be harmful to your brand. Yeah.
So what can companies do? Because we can understand it, we can track the disinformation, we know the the system. Should the companies fight back?
I think the most basic piece of advice that I could give would be you want to have a tracking mechanism. So for your industry, for your company, any of your competitors, being able to just track for keywords that are being mentioned in SNS channels, looking at news content either domestically or internationally, and just being aware of what's being said about your brand in its entirety, that's just step one in the process. And I think that will give you a lot of avenues to look at analysis, look at how things are spreading online, and using tools like Meltwater to understand, okay, how do we give a report to our executives or our key stakeholders that's going to truly measure the impact of these types of online discourse discussions. Yeah.
Some companies I've talked to kind of deny the fact that they're not putting social media too seriously. It's just X, there's all crazy stuff we should just forget about. Do you agree with that, or do companies need to be more aware of what's being taught on social media?
Yeah, I mean, it's a generational type of change, and it requires a lot of education to say why it's important to be tracking SNS. As I said, it's important to be tracking for positive reasons about how you can get new customers, how you can build brand awareness and so on. But it's also just really essential because everyone's got a smartphone these days. Everyone's on digital devices. All of your community, whether they be directly impacting your company or potentially in your customer base or just in your industry sector, they will be seeing information about your business on SNS channels. So I would say to those companies that feel like it's not important, that really the reality is pretty clear now that if you want to be serious about being a publicly facing organization, you need to be tracking for this type of content.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about another example about the Fukushima treated water, because I've talked to people doing business in China, and after this treated water release, a lot of companies were affected because anything from Japan seemed very polluted, even from diapers to sake or drinks. So could you walk us through about this topic?
Yeah, for sure. I think, it was a huge story, not just in Japan, but globally. And I think, what we're seeing on the slide here is actually looking at just how much there was content published mentioning nuclear contaminated water and how that spread in different languages. So what you're seeing here is a huge amount of content, north of almost 1 million social media posts mentioning that particular keyword and spreading across culture and language. And I think that, when you have these types of discussions really go viral online, it can, lead to a lot of different types of reactions from business communities, from public sector, and people in their everyday lives making decisions about what type of products they buy. And I think that, what we can say is that if you want to be able to respond to this type of issue with whatever your perception is or whatever your truth is, then you need to be able to be aware of this type of data. And you need to be looking at ways to counter it as effectively as possible. And I think that, what we it was a very diverse issue, and it was, of course, something that's, drew opinions across the globe about the impact of this type of policy. And I think that, what we saw was you need to be aware of exactly how each country or each culture is responding to this type of policy.
It's interesting that you analyze tweets or social media posts in different languages. So I think the Japanese people are beginning to be aware of what's being discussed on social media, but especially on Japanese social media. So do you think companies should broaden their views and reach out to other languages as well?
Absolutely. Well, if you're a company that has customers or stakeholders that are outside of Japan, then of course you need to be able to track for this type of SNS content or news content that's in other languages. And that's a strength of our product, is that we do track for over 100 different languages across the globe. And even you can do analysis about the trending themes and different ways you can compare coverage per country. And I think that is something that Japanese businesses, can add to their decision making. Because if they have, a good customer base in another country, or if they have ambitions to expand overseas, then really understanding what's being spoken about in your product area or your industry is vitally important.
So Elon Musk frequently talks about Japanese Twitter or X users are most active even in the world. So do you realize any difference between Japanese social media and Japanese social media outside Japan? Is there a different or basically the same trend?
No, I think Japan's a relatively unique environment for SNS, and I think X is extremely prevalent in Japanese society, and I think that the reliability and the reputation of X in Japan is very strong. I think it has a lot of business leaders. It has a lot of discussions from key public figures. I think it's something that is a reliable source of information for those that are seeking true, accounts of what's actually happening out there. And I think, when it comes to the public domain that X is, that is something I think that is part of maybe the collective society approach of Japan. And I think that, there are other unique aspects of Japanese culture when it comes to digital. People on their digital devices perhaps are looking at manga, not necessarily looking at SNS content.
Yeah, it's very Japanese.
It's very Japanese. So, it's just a different ecosystem. And I think that maybe that would cause situations where Japanese companies would say, well, we're different. We don't need to be tracking for SNS type of content. Whereas I think the data clearly shows that there's still a lot out there.
Okay. Let's go back to a healthcare example. So if a company, a healthcare company sees this information, should the company release an official statement or try to repost it or be on social media? How should companies react?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be different per industry. So it's probably not one size fits all for that type of example. But I think the first thing to do is be aware of it, understand the spread of the narrative, and then be able to understand, okay, well, what is your brand's position and what's the most effective way we can communicate with our customers, with our stakeholders, to put out that message. And I think that, Meltwater is very much a tracking software. We're able to supply the information, advise about the data management aspect of things, and then leave the decision-making of companies and organizations that know their brands best to see what's best.
Great. So this information is very difficult because it's not just done by net trolls, but by nation states. So, and some people say it's a national security. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, the Russia and Ukraine example is a clear one where there is a lot of false information being spread online. And I think that you're seeing governments, this concept of pre-bunking stories. So once a false narrative is posted online, you're seeing really quickly, the government's putting out press releases, being quite aggressive with the fact that they're saying this is a false narrative and that be aware that this could be something that spreads online. I think that will maybe be a growing strategy across the board. But I think that it's very true that especially throughout 2024 there will be a lot of news out there about mis and disinformation coming from state actors, and it's very much something that we're tracking and interested in to see develop, and of course very important for our public sector customers.
I ask this question because our viewers are mostly in the business sector, and maybe this kind of in Japan, they're not quite interested in like international relations. But talking to you today, it feels that even CEOs or business people should pay attention to what the government's doing, what's happening in the world. Do you agree with that?
Exactly. Yeah, I think you mentioned before, the Fukushima release issue last year impacted seafood sales and impacted all types of companies.
Like everything made in Japan was
exactly right. So of course, while these may feel like very government policy areas, they can have ripple effects very quickly. So that's where it can cross over into the private sector. And I think that it's just something that all facets of society need to be watching when it comes to how these types of narratives are spreading, and just being able to track it is just a basic way of having a first step.
Right. So any final comments or something we haven't added or discussed?
I think the key thing for us is being able to use technology to be able to track for these types of content that's publicly available. And then really adding the expertise of analysts or people from a business to interpret that data. That's the key aspect of it. And as I said, there's no technology out there that's going to give you a silver bullet when it comes to how to solve this problem of mis and disinformation. But what you can do is set up a basic tracking mechanism to be able to then use your own expertise to make effective decisions.
In terms of disinformation tracking by private sectors, which country is the most forefront? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly would be the US. In terms of the way that brands need to be across these types of pieces of information. And I think most of the Western world is catching up in terms of the brands needing to be across every way that their companies could be impacted. And even things like share prices, people who are talking about the movement of the stock market online and how false information can actually impact a share price. That type of thing is there's a lot of legislation, there's a lot of regulation about how to protect against that. And so, I think it's just a reality that it's commonplace.
Yeah, there can be like fake Twitter X account like by a CEO, and he can say something crazy and the stock price will go down.
Of course, absolutely, yeah. And you see that a lot these days.
Or there's like accident in this factory, which is disinformation, fake news, and maybe the stock will go down. Yes,
exactly. And I think that's just a reality of our online discourse these days, and everyone is pushing out messages on digital first, and that it's not a 7 a.m. newspaper type of news cycle anymore. It's a 24/7 one. So you just need to be nimble enough to track that.
And investors are looking and reaching out for all bits of information. So
that's
even AI is right now doing that. So
AI is only going to keep getting stronger when it comes to how it impacts the news industry and how it looks at ways that perhaps mis and disinformation could spread online. But I think that there's a lot of good things happening around regulation as well in that regard.
Okay, Tim, thanks for joining PIVOT.
Thanks so much for having me, Ryan. Appreciate it.
PIVOT では新たなメンバーの募集を始めました。ビジネスプロデュース、エンジニア、コーポレート、映像制作など積極的に採用しています。ご応募はこちらのリンク、または概要欄の URL からお願いします。日本をピボットするコンテンツを一緒に作りましょう。